Yeah, I think we're ready to start. Well, welcome to our presentation today on gaming, not just playing around, board games today. I'm Louise Kenny. I'm on the special events team. I'd like to do a little plug for the special events team. If you have some good ideas and would like to contribute to Encore learning through special events, we'd love to have you. So please feel free to contact me. We have a really fun presentation today because it was something that we didn't know a lot about on the committee. We had heard some of our speakers speak on NPR, and we decided to engage them to share with us what I heard on an NPR interview. Just a few technical things before we get on. First of all, you should ask questions using the Q&A and not chat. Chat will be disabled. So the Q&A, click on the Q&A icon to answer your questions. The questions will be visible to the audience only after they're answered, and we might combine similar questions. Use the Zoom controls to either display or hide the live transcript, which is closed captioning. And also, when you leave the webinar, we asked you to complete a survey on how well we did and what your thoughts were. So please do that as well. If you have any technical questions, email info@encorelearning.net. And before we jump into this, I'd like to remind you of a few fun things coming up and exciting things coming up. First of all, we have our annual meeting next Thursday, May 15th at 10 o'clock via Zoom. So please try to be there if you can. It's again, we only have this meeting once a year, so please do try to attend then. As a little enticement, we'll have a little laughter yoga following the business meeting on Zoom. So if you'd like to laugh a little bit, this is your opportunity. A few things coming up. We have some of our events are sold out, but I wanted to remind you of things that are coming up. Now, first of all, we have a walking tour of historic Washington Navy waterfront area there, the Navy waterfront area. That tour is full, but if you'd like to be on the waiting list, then we can certainly accept you on that. And also, we have a tour coming up of the National Stadium, an attitude tour of the National Stadium next Monday, the 19th. Also sold out, but you could be placed on the waiting list on that. And also next Monday is a presentation on mental health, the signs and ways to help someone who has potential mental health conditions. So that would be at 3 o'clock, 3 to 4:30 next Monday. And then on June 9th, we have Planet Word Museum, an adventure in words with founder Anne Friedman. And if you've ever been to Planet Word, it's a very interesting place focused on language, and it's really worthwhile. And Anne, of course, can tell us the long process to get it going and how successful it's been, and also some interesting changes that they've made there to make it very interactive because it's just so much fun for adults and students. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. Our topic is about gaming, specifically about board games. And we have two speakers today. Our first is Kevin Bertram, and Kevin founded and owns a business called Fort Circle Games, located in Washington. It's not a brick and mortar building; it's a website, but he's physically located in Washington. Interestingly, he named it Fort Circle based on the fortifications around Washington during the Civil War, the forts around Washington. He founded it in 2017. He is a gamer himself, a board gamer. He's designed several games, one being The Shores of Tripoli, another one being The Halls of Montezuma, which I think is coming out soon. But he's a long-term gamer. And actually, he has another one coming out that he designed with his wife, Shakespeare's First Folio. And then we have Tory Brown, who will be talking to us specifically about her game, Votes for Women. And she's going to be talking about what it is, why it is, how she developed it, and really how to play the game. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kevin. Kevin?
Hi, how are you all today? So what I thought I would do is I would kind of give a high overview of kind of modern board gaming and how we got here, and then turn it over to Tori, where she will have a far more in-depth dive on one game, Votes for Women, that she designed. So when we say board gaming, I think most people say like Monopoly or maybe Risk or Scrabble. And these are kind of older games that kind of are viewed as the classics and resonate with everybody. But I think that since 1995, there's been a real renaissance in board games, and I'll kind of walk you through why I think that's happened and some of the really exciting changes that have happened. So board gaming has been around forever. The Egyptians had board games. The Romans had board games. In fact, one of my very favorite archaeological finds was that they had a dice tower that was mocking the Picts and saying, now that you've beaten them, you can play games more often. And so, gaming has always been with us. Now, obviously, it's oftentimes, but although not always, been in a gambling context, but it's also been in an educational context. And I think that's the side that Tori and I are a little bit more interested in. So probably when modern board game become, or not mod, but pre-modern board game becomes interesting is in the 1870s, the Germans developed something called Kriegspiel, which was a board game, well, with little miniatures to teach wargaming concepts to their officers. And they developed very elaborate rules, and you can actually still play the 1870 version of that game. They have societies devoted to it. And it was viewed as that board gaming could be a tool for education. Now, that was certainly the case in the United States also, although in a little bit different of a sense. There were a number of games. The Game of Life was probably the one that most people will recognize today, that were about teaching values and how to be a good student or how to be a good citizen. And so games were being used still in the 1800s and early 1900s as a way to sort of, I don't want to say propaganda, but certainly encourage moral thinking. After World War II, games really started becoming seen as a leisure pastime, and that's when we started seeing games like Risk and Scrabble. Monopoly had developed actually prior to World War II as a game that was designed to teach people why a land on tax is the only taxes we should have, but it morphed into its modern game that it is today. And so those games became very popular, but there's a reason I think that some people think of them as kids games or don't really enjoy them. And I'm going to put Scrabble aside because I love Scrabble and I won't say a bad word about Scrabble. But a game like Risk or a game like Monopoly, when you play it, you don't know how long the game is going to take. It could take an hour, it could take 5 hours. People are being eliminated. That's how someone is going to win. And so that's not a way modern adults would want to spend their time. And what happened, which was pretty fantastic, was a game that came out in 1995 called Settlers Catan. Now it's just called Catan, and where you knew how long the game was going to take. It was going to take about an hour, and you weren't eliminating other players, and it was you were building up this island. It was still competitive. You were trying to have the best settlement on this island, but it was also not the harsh meanness that you would have in a game like Risk, where you're attacking people, or Monopoly, where you're trying to bankrupt people, your opponents. And so that really started a renaissance of gaming. It started primarily in Europe a little bit before, and then here in the United States. And so the last 30 years have been really exciting as far as if you're interested in game playing. Now, I grew up playing games with my dad. They were mostly of the war game type. But now, like, I actually, just before this talk, my wife and I played a game where we were rival corporations trying to terraform the planet of Mars. And I would lean my video over, except it's a little messy. And I don't know if my wife would want me to show you a little bit of mess on our kitchen table. And so the nice thing about this change in approach to games that made them a length of time that was reasonable, like when you're going to play one of our any game, kind of most modern games, it's going to take roughly how long. People are going to be engaged. It's not going to be where you're trying to eliminate people and then they have nothing to do. And so that's been very exciting. Now, there are all kinds of games coming out. Some of them are, frankly, on things I'm not that excited about, unicorns and mice and cheese and whatever. But there's also a good number of games that are in the area that I find most interesting, which is historical gaming. Now, I love history. Studied history as an undergrad, and you know, there's a lot of different ways to learn, and reading books, attending lectures, watching documentaries, going through primary documents. These are all fantastic ways to learn about history. But the nice thing about a board game is it allows you to think through in a more active instead of passive way about that history. And I'm going to let Tory talk about Votes for Women, so I won't talk about that game. But what we've done is we've tried to design games, me and my designers, that resonate and teach about the history, but yet at the same time, they don't just blindly follow history, because we want the players to have some level of agency. So our first game that we published was called The Shores of Tripoli. Those of you who are familiar with the Marine Corps hymn will probably recognize The Shores of Tripoli, and then why we have a following game called The Halls of Montezuma. And so The Shores of Tripoli was on the First Barbary War. And this war happened from 1801 to 1805. The Barbary states, the North African client states of the Ottoman Empire, demanded tribute. They would take it was state-sponsored piracy, and this had bedeviled the Washington administration and then the Adams administration, and because we no longer had the protection of the Royal Navy. And so finally, Thomas Jefferson sent subsequent squadrons to deal with this, to protect our fleets. And it's a fantastic part of American history that most people don't know. And I was actually surprised. The reason I decided to design a game on it, the reason this company exists, is I couldn't find a game on what I thought was this fascinating period of American history. I'd read a couple books and I was like, oh, this is great. There must be a great game on this. And so that kind of spurred the formation of our company. And now, we have a lot of games that we try to use very different approaches about very different topics. Like I said, Votes for Women was our second game. That's Tory's design. I helped a little work on it, but she's the brilliant mastermind behind that game. And like I said, I'll let her go into detail on that. But we try to think about what are things that are of interest to people and how can we make a game out of them. So in the Halls of Montezuma, the American player plays President Polk, and not only do you have to prosecute the military war, but you also have to make sure that you keep your political popularity up so you can pass all of the domestic legislation that you need to. On the flip side, the Mexican player plays not only the Mexican forces fighting, but also the nascent anti-war movement that was starting in the United States. A little fun fact is actually Abraham Lincoln was a first-term congressman during the war, and he sponsored what were called spot resolutions, where because President Polk had said that the war, American blood had been shed on American soil, which probably wasn't true. And so he kept saying, well, I want to see the spot. And so that was where Abraham Lincoln got a little bit of popularity, although he lost his reelection, but things turned out for him okay in the end. But those, both that and The Shores of Tripoli are military games, and we wanted to expand the approach to other types of games. And so we have a game coming out on the history of the Supreme Court called First Monday in October, which is from the Supreme Court. The first time it meets in the term is the first Monday in October. And you are a different philosophy, basically, and you're trying to put your justices on the court. You're trying to make sure that major cases as they happen get resolved the way you want. So, a case like Dred Scott could be decided very differently than it was historically, or Korematsu, or Miranda, or any of the kind of famous cases that we know about. And that's done through these philosophy tracks of the different types of issues that Supreme Court rules on. And so we took what is a very complicated subject, right? Over 200 years of Supreme Court history, and we were able to condense that down into a game that takes about 2 hours. It's our longest game, and really gives you a flavor for how a court shifts over time philosophically, how those cases affect the rest of future jurisprudence. And so we thought that was again an interesting way to make a game about something that people are interested in and make it educational, but yet also make it fun to engage with. And as we have a couple of few more games, and I don't mean to make this a sales pitch, but I just want to kind of say like these are the different types of history that we can look at. We have a game on the treaty that ended the 1905 war between Russia and Japan. Now you might think that's a kind of an esoteric topic. Well, the treaty discussions happened in New Hampshire, and it was during Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, and it's actually why Teddy Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize, because he kind of cajoled both sides into signing a treaty. And so in the game, if you play with two players, it's one player is the Russian delegation, one player is the Japanese delegation, or you can add a third player who is Teddy Roosevelt. And so he wants to make sure both sides find an equitable treaty. And then on a very different approach, we have a game on the Shakespeare's First Folio, being rival printers, trying to put it together. We have a game about the women Soviet pilots during World War II who fought against the Nazis in biplanes. They were called the Night Witches. And so we just try to find interesting aspects of history and then find mechanisms that can make them an enjoyable, easy to play or a fairly easy to play game, but yet really is steeped in the history. So that's what we tried to do overall as me and the designers I work with. But then I think that while that can give you a nice overview, it would be far more interesting to do a deep dive. And so that's how I'm going to turn it over to Tory to do a deep dive about Votes for Women, a game on ratifying the 19th Amendment. And I have to say, a little side note, working with Tory, one of the most enjoyable things that I've ever done, but that's because I've known her since 2001. So it was just a wonderful project to work with her on. So Tory, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. And I can say similarly, having known Kevin for my entire adult life, this process has been unexpected and delightful. I was not a game designer when we first started talking about a game about the American Woman Suffrage Movement, but I certainly have that credit to my name now. And I don't, if you've ever played a game called Fun Facts or go around the room and say something interesting about yourself, I now and forever will say that I designed a board game, which is pretty great. I want to talk to you a little bit about who I am, where I came from, and then about the game itself, the design process, the research, the work that went into it, and how to play. So please, if you have questions, use the Q&A box. Happy to talk through. But first of all, this is me. I'm Tory Brown. I went to George Mason University, and I graduated from Centerville High School. So I have some Fairfax and Northern Virginia cred. I am currently a communication strategist for a large labor union in Washington, D.C. I've been in movement politics for my whole career, which has been wonderful and difficult. The work to make a better community, society, country, world is work that never ends. But I'm delighted that I've been able to devote my career to work that I really believe in and that I hope matters and has a legacy. And I'm a big believer in the power of play to educate, inspire, and mobilize. I certainly want people to have fun when they play Votes for Women, but I also want them to take away a bit of a message. It's a bit of my own politics and my own hope for what folks can believe and understand. Here you see some fun images. I was a nerd from a very young age, and my folks, both my mom and my dad, very committed to ensuring that I knew I had a voice and that I had agency, and that there are other women in this world and in this country that had made impressive change. I was able to work on a large march in Washington, D.C., my very first job out of college. We brought 1.2 million people to the mall. Certainly, Mrs. Banks of Mary Poppins fame might be your favorite suffragist. She certainly was mine for a very long time until I started digging in and I found a few more examples. And the last piece here is this quote by Maya Angelou. The truth is, no one of us can be free until everybody is free, is something that I take very personally and important in my work, my life, my voting, and how I approach this. I was inspired by, lots of different things. As Kevin mentioned, I'm a fan of sort of the new classic board games. I played board games as a kid, but as an adult was inspired by games like a Ticket to Ride, where you're building train tracks across the country. There are also some interesting political games that really expanded my mind about how you could tell political stories with different tools. There's a wonderful game called Watergate, where President Nixon is one player against the editors of the Washington Post, and Nixon is covering up his crimes, and the editors are trying to expose them. It's a very fast game. It's a two-player game, which is how I often play, and it's just really wonderful. You reach into a bag, you have this evidence that you're trying to connect the different players of the Watergate scandal, and like I said, it made me realize that you could do more than, I don't know, buy Park Place in a board game. You could tell a story while giving players agency and motivation. Another wonderful game that also happens to include Nixon, it's just sort of random, I swear, is a game called 1960 Making of a President, where you are the campaign managers of the Nixon and Kennedy campaigns fighting for electoral college votes, and the winner gets to elect their president. And so, there are these, I certainly knew about war games and wasn't very interested, but these games about American politics were absolutely interesting to me, and opened my eyes to how I could use a board game to tell a story I was really fascinated in, which is suffrage and the American Woman Suffrage Movement. 70 years of campaigning, of activism, of losing, a lot of losing involved in the suffrage movement. And we celebrated, hopefully folks remember way back when in 2020, 100th year anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And that became a spark that, there's this big moment happening. There's going to be all this conversation. This might be the perfect time to introduce players to this idea of a board game about this moment. Folks would be people would never be more interested in the suffrage movement than around this 100th anniversary. And so that's when we launched the Kickstarter and got the campaign rolling for the game. And certainly, I have here the logo for Fort Circle, and Kevin's partnership, his constant cheerleading, his understanding of the business were all incredibly helpful and influential. I would not have made this game without him. The game itself, to just dig right in, what is this that she is talking about? The game is about ratifying a constitutional amendment. So I just copied from the Constitution, Article 5, which James Madison wrote, that there are a few different ways to amend the Constitution. The most popular of which is that Congress must offer or propose a constitutional amendment with 2/3 majorities in House and Senate, and states must ratify, 3/4 of states must ratify. And since the ratification took place in 1919 and 1920, we have a board of 48 states. And so this is what the game is about. Can you, as a player, ratify the 19th Amendment? Or, as opposition, can you stymie progress and keep this from happening? The heart of my game are these wonderful people that I researched, the folks who dedicated their whole lives, wrote, spoke, inspired, cajoled, were imprisoned, were tortured. All of this, everybody from the people who stood on a street corner handing out flyers to the folks in the back rooms plotting out strategy, drafting articles, giving large scale speeches. it took every single one of these thousands of people to get it done. And as a person that's trying to cajole and inspire other activists to join movements and to take part in this work, hearing all of these different stories, all of these different backgrounds, folks from different faiths, different races, different income levels, is all really inspiring to research, and really sort of drives the narrative of the game as these different people are sort of played in succession as they're able to build power and campaign across the country. Of course, the message, what I want folks to take away is the power of movements. And ultimately, that is the only way average people in America have ever been able to inspire change and achieve a better society, right? This promise of a more perfect union only gets achieved when we are doing the work together. We live in a society where it's really easy to feel powerless, to feel like our voice doesn't matter because there are so many other voices and so much demands on our people's attention. But when we gather together, when we all march in the same direction, or as you see here, this was a sit-in at the Cherrydale pharmacy in Arlington in the 1960s, protesting segregation and the differentiation of services, right from a lunch counter in Arlington, Virginia, to the streets of New York during Occupy, and across the country during the uprising of 2020. We know that powerful movements create change, and that by joining together, we too can tap into that power. And so that's what I hope folks can carry away and feel inspired by as they play my game. In order to create Votes for Women, I did so much research. And I was doing that research in 2020 during the pandemic. So unfortunately, the Library of Congress's collection was off limits. Some of the libraries that I would have liked to, or museums, but a lot of the collections had been put online. Again, coming into 2020 and the centennial of the 19th Amendment, Congress had appropriated funds to have state historical societies and the Library of Congress and other institutions of public history to post information online. And through that funding and subsequent work, I was able to identify documents. I was able to, use Wikipedia, but then go verify what I found. Isn't that a novel idea? The National Park Service has had a wealth of information about the amendment because the work happened in every state, in every corner of this country. So it wasn't just enough to know about what happened in DC. It was looking nationwide. And the documents, the photographs, the books, the ribbons, the everything being available online was incredibly important and powerful, to be able to do as much research as I did and to translate that into the game itself. So it is a learning experience. There's surely something you don't know. There's a lot that I didn't know, even having been interested in this topic, put into the game. A lot of great books out there. These were a few that I worked through. Suffrage by Ellen Carroll Dubois is a great book. Recasting the Vote by Kathleen Cahill is phenomenal. And the Women's Hour that talks about the sort of the last phase of the suffrage campaign, particularly in Tennessee, which is a state that is the last state to vote on ratification. So ebooks, and then once my library started back up lending, was able to go in and get a bunch of books to research. I was also able to use online public history content. The New York Times put together a wonderful array of materials around the centennial. The wonderful display in the New Jersey History. The New Jersey History Museum is like a museum of the Revolutionary War. I learned, in fact, that the first state that women could vote in was New Jersey in the 1700s because there were no gender restrictions. And so everybody said, oh, well, like, isn't Wyoming the first state where women could vote? What about Utah? In fact, far sooner than that, further back in American history, women could vote in New Jersey from 1776 to 1807. In 1807, they removed the landowning restrictions restrictions and inserted gender restrictions. So that was the end of that. But they've gone through voter rolls and found women names in the voter rolls in New Jersey, which I thought was really interesting. Senate archives were also important. There's an aspect of the game where you are trying to convince Congress to pass the legislation, and so every time the amendment came up every year starting in 1878, and it failed every year since 1878. And some of the senators were quite honest about why they were voting against, and a lot of that information comes into the game. Quick look at the spreadsheet. This is just defining eras, defining importance, defining if there were links to documents, being able to do this amount of research, something that was born out of my experience as a college debater, and keeping myself organized, keeping myself sort of, understanding priority of what could go where, how many books do we have, how many, natural disasters, all of this sort of gets sorted out through the spreadsheet to end all spreadsheets. All of that, you put it in a box, you shake it up, and here it is, my game, Votes for Women on the American Woman Suffrage Movement. It is a card-driven game, so you see these cards here. The game itself, you are drawing cards into your hand and playing them either for the text you see on the card or for some other various effects. And each card, I think is the next, I guess we'll talk about the card next. The way the game works is that suffrage plays versus opposition. And I ask someone to play opposition, to work against women's suffrage in a game, in a play situation, in a setting. You don't have to believe that that was right, but I learned the most through researching the opposition deck and understanding just how many women opposed suffrage and the very various reasons, not many of which I agree, obviously, but that doesn't matter, right? Like, they were firm in their convictions, just as firm as the women who are voting, supporting suffrage. And I think it's important to take on and be honest about these different sides and what motivated them. There's 6 turns, and you're building power for your side out in the states as you're playing through the game. Is represented by some small cubes, but you really start to see the push and pull, that it was not just an inevitable march towards progress that suffrage is able to execute. It really was a lot of losses, a lot of gains and retractions, a lot of outside influences, getting involved. And it is, as they say in board gaming, it is an asymmetrical game. As I mentioned, in order to pass an amendment, you need 36 states to support it. All opposition needs is 13 states to oppose ratification and reject the constitutional amendment. So the game has to provide a dynamic that lets suffrage build its victory and power, that they're doing a lot of work while opposition is sort of digging a trench and maintaining a very a deep well of opposition in a smaller area. And so that was just an interesting challenge. And coming from working in politics, I think a lot about really hard choices, limited resources, and unlimited opportunities, and tried to put a lot of that into the game, and sort of the natural parallels I see between a board game and who has power and how is that power distributed, and politics, which, as it turns out, is a lot about power and who has power and how is how is that power distributed. This is the board. So when you set up a game of Votes for Women, this is what you'll see on the table in front of you. 6 regions of the United States, more or less. Got to get a little creative. Maybe you could say Pennsylvania's in that Northeast, but for our purposes, it is a part of Atlantic and Appalachia. Very fortunately, 48 states, divides pretty evenly, 8 states in 6 regions. So you see each region has 6 states here. And our heroes of the game, Sojourner Truth was active in Ohio, so her card provides influence across the Midwest region. And some of the campaigners out in the Spanish-speaking campaigners out in the West will be able to put, spread their power out in the West, right? And so we tie activists to the regions where they had the most strength. At the bottom in the middle, you'll see a congressional dome. That's how we track progress in Congress. We track turns, and there are these persistent effect cards. Some cards have a small symbol on them, and they stay in effect for either for the rest of the turn or for the rest of the game. And then there's a phase known as final voting, where we sort of nothing has been sorted out. We go into a sort of sudden death, very exciting conclusion to the game. But you see here, you know, it's been interesting understanding as I teach a lot of people how to play the game, hearing them interact with the board. You start to hear folks say something like, "Well, I'm from Maryland, and so I'm going to put Maryland." You get to hear people's stories as they work through their personal maps as they work through the map of votes for women, and so it's just been really an interesting experience to get to teach people how to play, and then to watch them, come up with their justifications for where they're playing on the map. You may have noticed the board is a pretty basic beige, a pretty basic canvas color. That in and of itself is a nod to the tote bags that women used. They would stuff it full with flyers and go out into the city or counties where they were located and hand out. Maybe there was a speaker coming, maybe there was a vote coming up, maybe there was a rally. And so even the background of the board is a nod to the way that suffragists were able to spread their message. Nothing in this game happened by chance. It was all a lot of careful thought and obsessive thinking about how to tell the story about this incredible movement. As promised, I got a little bit ahead of myself, but this is what a card looks like. I don't know if I'm in the way. This is what the card looks like for the in the game. You see original artwork at the top. Every card, and there's over 125 cards in the box itself. Every card has original artwork, a photograph, a document, a book cover, something, which was a wonderful challenge to, how can I display visually what's happening in this card and depict what's important about this card. You can see that there's a title, there are these symbols, they tell you what to do, and at the bottom of every single card is what's known in the business as flavor text. And flavor text is I likened it to having to write a textbook in a text message. Why did this card, why is it in the box? Why is it important? What about it is meaningful? If you are interested in this, is there some other information that you might look to? Is there a quote that I found particularly fascinating from a certain activist, or from a member of Senate saying awful things? And so, it's a way that this sort of educational component really drives home, where it's not just do the card, see the thing, and do the thing. It is this opportunity to learn a little bit more, a little bit more. I could only put so much. It had about 160 characters to work with, but it I think really opens up the narrative about why this card or why that person. There's lots of fun little bits in the game. Up at the top in the center, you see what we call meeples. In the game, we call them campaigners. And so these custom figures that you move across the map as they are campaigning in different areas. There are a wonderful set of buttons, all based on historical buttons. The suffrage movement was the first political effort to make use of buttons to wear your politics on your lapel. It's the first time that cellophane and these bits of aluminum were available at mass scale to distribute for political campaigners. You see some red X's and green checks. They spread across the board to indicate whether a state has voted for the amendment or against and rejected ratification. And there's some dice and some cubes in the game as well. So lots of bits. You get a lot of stuff in the box that make the game go and show that you're amassing power or losing it, or that you are gaining resources that you need or losing it. Trying to make it all very tactile and tangible for players. I said, in order to win, you first need Congress to pass. And so we use 6 columns, or these white cylinders in the congressional track. And then for opposition, for suffrage to win, you need 36 states to have a majority support. For opposition, if you can keep Congress from doing anything, which these days just feels like the natural state of things, then if Congress never passes it, then it can't go to the states for ratification. So that's one way opposition can win. Or they can get 13 states to reject the amendment, which the suffrage movement itself was pretty close to having happen back in 1920. So each side has a little bit of a different way to win and a goal to achieve, but it balances each other out, and it is historically accurate. Games aren't birthed in their final form. You can see here we went through a number of prototypes, different ways that we thought that the board might work or look. Some bolder colors, some more neutral. It's an iterative process. And we worked with graphic designers that helped bring this vision to life and create this, right? So some boards had a lot of illustrations on it and others had none. And I'm really happy with where the board turned out with that picture of Lady Liberty marching across the country. It's from a 1915 magazine called Puck Magazine. This like woman carrying a torch, Liberty marching across the states, is, I think, just a perfect depiction of how the rights and the empowerment of women were marching across. This is what it looks like on the table. You put these different these cubes on, and you see that there's different campaigners in different places. You've got your card set out, right? So this is mid-play. Folks are working to build power across different states. All right. Oh, no, I got you. Okay. As I like to say, right, Votes for Women lets you play through history. This is what I would call the board state in August 18th, 1920. As you can see, suffrage gained a number of early victories, right? A pure sweep through the West. You see that the Plains and the Midwest went entirely for suffrage. These are all states that voted to ratify the 19th Amendment. The Northeast is a little bit, we've got some good coverage, but Vermont, in fact, the governor had vetoed the state legislature's vote on suffrage, and Connecticut had not yet voted. It's not looking so great for our heroes here in the Mid-Atlantic. Virginia, Maryland, Delaware all rejected and voted to oppose the suffrage amendment. And then down across the South, well, Arkansas and Texas are champions for women's rights. We see the rest of the states in the South all opposed. And a lot of that is because the states in the South did not want to draw attention to the role of voting and who could and couldn't vote in their states. Racism and white supremacy keep coming up in my research for Votes for Women, and certainly the role of race as a division inside of the suffrage movement, but then as a motivation for people in power to vote against, right? Because if you are voting to empower women and to give women the vote, you're also doing so for Black women. And there were plenty of folks who were violently opposed to that, not just in the South, but throughout the country. It's also, there's a big influx of immigrants into the United States, and xenophobia against those immigrants and those women who weren't necessarily English speakers also created divisions and a sort of recalcitrance on the part of lawmakers to extend the vote to women, because it would be all women. And the suffrage movement tried to sort of figure out, could just some of us vote? And how would that look, right? Some real sort of bargain with the devil kind of opportunities that gets played out in the game as well. But to get back on track on this picture here, you see that North Carolina and Florida had also not voted, but were not great candidates for it didn't seem likely that their state houses would vote for suffrage, leaving Tennessee. And with the hindsight of history, we know that that Tennessee was the 36th state to ratify. It was a very close vote. In fact, it was tied on the 18th, and they voted again on the 19th. And one man named Harry Byrne changed his vote, and he did so with a note from his mother in his pocket, who his mother, Feb Byrne, had encouraged him to vote for suffrage, to back Harry Chapman Catt, and to give women the right to vote. And I really love this story about Feb Byrne. She shows up in the game. You know, we might not be members of the Tennessee House or Senate. We might not be people in positions of power, but our voices are important. And you know, we never know who we might convince when we speak out about something that's important and dear to us. So, you know, while we call them lawmakers and decision makers, our voices are incredibly influential, and we should always understand the power that our voice can have, and you know, the need to speak up and speak out about things that are important. The game itself comes with this array of historical document reproductions. Uh, Kevin included a historic letter in Shores of Tripoli and said that this was something that was important to him as the publisher of Fort Circle, that his games continued to have. So would I recommend a couple of documents? And I sent like 15. We compromised and came up with about a list of 13. But as you open the box and you're pulling out the board and the cards, you are met with this stack, this wave of history. There's a letter from Abigail Adams that she wrote to John Adams during the 1776 Continental Congress, reminding him to remember the ladies. He did not. Two, a voting rights, a voter registration slip for Miss Feb Byrne, that she was able to register to vote after her son had voted to ratify the 19th Amendment. These documents aren't a part of gameplay. You don't have to pass these around. They're really just meant to give folks an experience and to give folks a wave of newspaper clippings and posters and flyers and postcards. It's just it's been a really interesting piece of the game and something folks remark on, just to set you into the historical era. And I really love these every single one of them. I love these documents. I've been really overwhelmed by some of the great reviews. We had a write-up in the Washington Post review of books recently, which, you know, for my game to be considered and to be, you know, in line with and on the same page as literary text is pretty phenomenal. And again, Kevin had hounded that book reviewer, I think, a few times, suggesting that he review Votes for Women. And when he finally did, it was extraordinarily nice things he had to say. Gaming websites, folks that are in the industry, it's all been very complimentary, and it's just really nice. You know, something I'd stuck my head into for so long. When I finally come up for air and the game is finally released, to to have folks get it has been really lovely. And I've been able to take the game to different events. I was in Montreal a couple of weeks ago, and you know, even internationally, there's been an appetite. Colleges and campuses have taken up the game, given lectures to courses on progressive era history, public history. How is history made alive for people outside of textbooks, and AP government courses, certainly game design courses. There are, I think, Duke University and a number of others, Central Michigan, have game design majors. And so been able to talk with folks who've used my game, as a part of their curriculum. And lots of schools have board game clubs, including Georgetown, giving a talk similar to this to some students at Georgetown. And so it's just been really wonderful to connect with young folks who are so passionate and committed about changing the world and to using their voice, and to have this be a small part of helping them think through how they can do that, and to express themselves as game designers has been really lovely. As I mentioned, there's been some international interest. Devere is a Spanish publisher, and so they translated almost everything. As you can see, it is not Votas para Mujeres. It is Votes for Women, but everything else, and except for some of the historical documents, someone spent a whole lot of time translating all my little flavor text, all of the different pieces and components, the instructions as well. And it's been wonderful to watch Spanish reviewers play the game. They seem to like it. No one says muy mal, and so that's like, I'm sort of holding it like, oh, they seem to have really nice things to say. And there are other publishers in other languages. I think we're looking at French, German, Portuguese. It's I didn't think my little American history game would be appealing to folks, but fortunately, I think there is some interest in what is America doing, and in this idea of progress and stories and inspiring stories, I think, across the globe. It has not been without controversy. Facebook banned ads about Votes for Women for what it calls a sensitive social issue. What was probably AI run amok, that they were trying to beat back on some other kinds of ads and communication about who is voting and what are they voting about. We got snared in a bit of that, but it was a wonderful earned media opportunity, and I think opened up the game to a lot more people and exposed a lot more people to the game than it would have otherwise. My friend Gerard here is still don't know which side I'm on, is not a fan. He thought that the game was a bunch of political crap, which I don't know what he thought would happen, and some controversies. All that to be said, don't be like Gerard. What you should do is go buy Votes for Women, and especially if you can, visit our friend Kathleen at the Labyrinth Game Store. It's an Eastern Market on Pennsylvania Avenue. You could go walk through the farmers market, have a nice brunch, and visit Labyrinth. It's a wonderful game store. If you're not into Votes for Women, but you're into games, it is the place to go. It's really wonderful. I highly recommend going to check out Labyrinth. And with that, I will say thank you very much. Louise and Laura have been wonderful, and of course, Kevin is the best opener a girl could ask for. I'll leave you with this, one of my favorite headlines that did not make the game. If I could ever get someone to write something like this about me, I feel like I'd really made it, because tomfoolery from obnoxious women, I feel like, is how things have changed in the past and maybe might change in the future. So let's get to it. And with that, are there any questions?
Okay, well, that was great. That was just great. First of all, most of us don't know anything about what it takes to produce a game, and the pure amount of research that you did is just amazing. So so thank you. We tend to think of games as light, and however they happen, they happen. So very, very interesting. Thank you to you and to Kevin for a very interesting intro. I have a question first. How many people can play the game at once?
It's a 1 to 4 player game. There is a solo, or we'll call it a sort of automated mode. So I can play myself against, it's a dedicated deck. I can also use that to play cooperatively. So if you and I, Louise, just can't bring ourselves to oppose suffrage, we can play together against the evil robot. But you can also play up to 4 players, you and I against Kevin and Laura, and we each, sort of go back and forth doing the work we have in front of us.
Okay. There's a question here in the Q&A from JMB. I'm not sure who that is. Will you talk about other games? Premo said, as Americans look for more excuses to put down their phones, the board game hobby has exploded in popularity and now is a global multi-billion-dollar industry. Here in the Washington area, board game publishers are finding success with unique titles and award-winning designs. Do either one of you want to comment about other games that have really taken off?
Sure. So the interesting thing is that there are somewhere between 4 to 6,000 games published a year, which is a lot of games. Uh, and most of them don't make very much, most people don't hear about them because that's a lot of games to begin with. But, there are games for almost every kind of interest. I think probably the game that maybe most of your folks have heard of is a game called Wingspan, designed by a friend of Tori and I's, Elizabeth Hargrave, and it's where you're a bird watcher. And there's all these gorgeous cards about different birds, and you have to feed them and you watch them, and it's a beautiful game that is also seems to be extremely popular. I wish our game sold as many as it did. But there's all kinds of different games. There's games about, a lot of games around trains seem to be very popular, whether you're building routes across the United States or across Europe and you're shipping goods and developing things. There's games about, I mean, there's such, it's almost, I read that question. I'm like, I mean, there's so many games that it's almost anything you could think of. Like I said, my wife and I just today played a game about terraforming the planet of Mars, right? And so how to have enough water and oxygen and heat there so people can live there. I'm just like, I'm looking over here. There's a game for hunting Blackbeard and the ecology of a river. And I'm just looking around here. I mean, there's just like all kinds of, there's a game based on the movie Dune. There's a game about collecting flowers in the Victorian era. So like, there's all kinds of different games. And,
Yeah,
I'm happy to answer. If you have interest, I can help direct you to find a game.
Well, I guess
But
the point
I think
is-
trying
that's
to
right.
give an overview
Yes.
of all of the games in the world is really tough because, like I say, about
Yeah.
5,000 are published every year.
I think you could, like, anything you are interested in, you could put it into Google and write board game, and there's probably something for you. My husband and I play a game called Holotype, which is about collecting dinosaur specimens. So you go out to dig sites, and then you go to the library and you collect the specimen, and then you publish. It is a publish or perish, right? You are a university professor trying to publish on these different kinds of dinosaurs, right? Like if you like dinosaurs, Holotype might art. I don't really care about dinosaurs, but it's still a fun game. It's a worker placement game as you sort of put this around. Wingspan is not just Wingspan, but there's also a version of it about dragons where you're collecting different kinds of dragons and they have different abilities. And now there's Finspan if you like fish, that there are different kinds of fish and things that you are looking at, right? Like it is, I have a couple of games, like little small box games here. I don't know if it's backwards. Sea Salt and Paper is a like a card matching game that plays pretty quick. And I have Gentle Rain, which is a tile placing solitaire game that I just sort of when I travel, I take a couple of small games. It's a lot easier to travel with than my own game. But they are, the Gentle Rain is very relaxing, and Sea Salt and Paper is easy to teach. And so if I with someone at dinner, we can play a quick game. It's thousands of options.
It sounds like a good idea would be for people to go to Labyrinth and kind of just look around and get a
And
sense.
talk to the staff. The staff is wonderful. They will, be able to guide you.
Okay, and then the bird game is Wingspan. Is that what it is? Wingspan?
Yep, wings like the bird and
Wings.
span.
Well,
Yeah.
I asked because we're running a course right now about birding, and I'm involved with that, so I will mention that to our birding class. They won't know about it probably. I have another question here from Ron Wise, who said on the board game there's a small number in white in each state. What does that number represent?
That is for the what we call the Oppobot. When you're playing solitaire or cooperatively, you're rolling a dice for the opposition forces. No one is the opposition, so there's no brain. We use a dice rolling to do that. So, if you roll a 6-sided die, that tells you what region you would be sort of working in, and then you roll an 8-sided dice, and that tells you which state you should put those resources into. So it keeps you, it provides strategic guidance for the Oppo bot. I find it really useful when you are putting a lot of bits out. Like, all right, like I start at 1 and I go to 2 at different regions and different states. It helps keep me a little organized.
Okay. Robbie asked, when did the word suffrage begin to be used, and what does it mean, and why would and would you know why? It's a question. So what is suffrage? Where did that come from?
I don't know the origin of the word, but it is in the Elizabeth Cady Stanton's declaration, right? She writes as a sort of fundamental organizing tool this position paper. It's like 12 or 13 different sort of declaration of women's rights, and it spans everything from property rights to suffrage. And so she's using that terminology in 1848. I'm not, I don't, I'm not, I, it's a fascinating question. Kevin,
Actually,
do
I
you
know
know?
this one.
Oh, yay. All right.
Yes. So it comes from a Latin word, suffragium, I believe. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And it meant more like, it didn't mean voting. It was like assistance or guidance. And then somehow, I think it was, and then there's a French word that came from the Latin that is suffrage, but but it still didn't have quite the voting term. I'm not sure how it happened, but in the United States, that it took on the notion of voting as a change from the word, which meant more like assistance or guidance in the past, at least in the original Latin. That's all I know about it, but that's from my Latin. So.
And I can tell you that in the 1900s, a British journalist used the term suffragette as a diminutive, right? He was, in essence, oh, you sweet little suffragettes. The British militants took it on. You want to call us that? That's fine. We will, right? And so you hear the mother character in Mary Poppins sing the song Sister Suffragette. It becomes, right, like part and parcel with the movement in the UK. The United States, it was not a part of it. They don't call themselves suffragettes. You see a few instances of it in press when they're trying to be rude, we'll call it. But they like, and the game itself uses the broader term suffragist, which is what they call themselves.
Are all, this question for me, are all books or games, I should say, as well researched as yours? I mean, is that a common thread?
Kevin, what do you think?
Well, you're asking us to brag, but we are definitely known as a company that pays more attention to the history. I would say that there are a handful of games from other companies that also do at this level, but for the most part, no. Most part, I don't think the love and attention, because this isn't really a business. This is a passion hobby. I mean, it's a business. In theory, we make money, but we do it because we love history. And so we really try to go the extra mile.
And I've continued even after like I still am fascinated by this and continue to learn. And I was in Nashville, so I got to go to the women's the reading room. They have a Boats for Women reading room, and I was in Wyoming, and they are the equality state because of their special role. And so I took my picture with you. I like, this is now my personality, and so it's just hard to let go of.
So if people play any of the games, yours in particular, I'm thinking, do they get better at it?
Yes, very
Yeah.
much so. I think there's an understanding of the decks. There are strategies that you will come to. Some, the deck gets stronger for suffrage as you go through, which is the history. I mean, it started out with like a group of 300 people in Seneca Falls, New York, and became this world, this nationwide phenomenon. And so the deck does that. And I think if you have no idea about the history, you may not have a guess about that. But once you've played it a couple of times, you're like, oh, I see how that works.
With our game on the First Barbary War, they use it in the classroom at the U.S. Naval Academy, which would make sense because, it's the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps in the Middle East. And what they found is that, and this was by design, is that usually the United States doesn't do very well the first time someone plays because they're coming into a situation without any knowledge. But as they kind of understand both their opponents and the forces, the next time they play, they tend to get a little better and a little better. And once they've played some, then each side, Tripoli or the United States, wins about the same amount of times. And I think that was something when we were designing it, I had a lot of input from naval officers about, what are the lessons that they want young, officers to be learning. And it's about how important it is for you to understand both yourself and your opponents. And so that kind of baked into the game. So definitely as you play, you definitely learn strategies, you understand what's going on a little better. And that's true with most games. Even a game like poker or spades or pinochle, right? The first time you play, you probably get better as you play. And I think that's just natural.
I find it so interesting that these games are designed to teach you about an event. If you play poker, you want to win, right? Or Monopoly, you want more hotels on my property than your property. But I mean, this is really teaching somebody about any of these subjects, this one in particular.
I think games always have something to teach us. Even if you think about chess, right? Some positions, some pieces are more powerful, and some are just meant to be eaten up and cast aside, right? Like we learn what it means to be a pawn when we play chess. And I think that games have always been a part of human history for reinforcing the rules of society and how things work. And so I think mine is really explicit about it. But we're always like, play is how people learn. And I think that games have an important role in that.
But they haven't been thought of that way, in my view. They were fun and games, so to speak.
Very subtle. Yeah.
It's a tool to learn. So, well, this has just been great. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh no, I was going to say there was a real streak in American game history that games were used for children to teach moral values. Like that, I would say from like the 1840s to the 1940s. Really, that was like, and the games weren't very good, but they certainly had a point of view, right, about moral learning. And but yeah, and then I think in the 50s, so kind of like in our kind of horizon, they became fun, right? The post World War II kind of consumerism that we engaged in. So then that's what came about. And so now I think they're starting to shift to be a little bit more than just for children for fun. So.
Well, this is just great. And for everybody attending here, we've recorded this. So if you wanted to share it with other people, please do. It's on our Encore Learning channel on YouTube. So I think it's great because I think we're going to share this also on our communication. Again, it was just great. I'm so pleased. I'm so glad that I happened to be listening to NPR on my way home and became so aware of both of you and what you're doing. So, and the next time I'm in Capitol Hill, I'm going to wander into Labyrinth and see your game. So thank you very much. I do want to remind everybody to fill out the survey after this because we do count on your input coming in. Next week, there is another lecture on mental health. Maybe games could help with mental health these days. So do listen to that. That's at 3 to 4:30. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your what's going to be, I guess, a rainy evening. So good night. Good. Thank you. See ya.